It's time for the Utah Jazz season preview, a team that has let us down in March and April for the last couple of seasons. Will it happen again? Well, let's try and get to the bottom of it. And one person who's not going to be getting to the bottom of that, but who knows what they're doing? Well, I know what they're doing. They're here. It's Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and on this sad day, this is Democracy Manifest. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok, at redrock_bball, and on Instagram, at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Across the summer, FanDuel is giving all customers something every day, either a boost or a bonus every single day for every single customer all summer long. Go to FanDuel.com right now to get started. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We are available on all platforms. So double bang, single bang? No. Always double. Give us the thumb. Leave your comments down below on the video. And we are here, as I said, to talk Utah Jazzmen. And in past years, we've done Utah Jazz with the founder and the host, founder of the Locked On Podcast Network, the host of the Locked On Jazz podcast. But we've got a new voice in today. David is busy with being the big man. So we're going to talk to a man who's been on this podcast plenty of times talking draft stuff, and he is a host of Locked On Jazz as well, and that is Leif Thulin. So we might as well just get Leif in here, and we can start, riffing on the Jazz. Hey! All right, so here he is. Let's bring him in. The one of the main guys over at Locked On Jazz, and also a frequent visitor to all of these swig outlets in Salt Lake City. That's a thing, isn't it? Swig? I've heard about all these soda stores in Utah. Leif, you're a big swig.
I've only been to one once in my life, and I'm not much of a soda drinker. So they are very, very big there in Utah. I'm not the right person to ask, but I can confirm they are on every street.
I was in Salt Lake City in 2017. I don't remember seeing any of those soda stores, but apparently then I watched this documentary last year and I went, oh, wow, this is crazy. I didn't actually know that was a thing, but there you go. We're not here to talk sodas. We're here to talk Utah Jazz, a team that is, as I said at the start of this show before you came on, Leif, a frustrating team from a fantasy perspective because of the very, very hard, at least predictable pivots that happen after the All-Star break and once we head into March, because they're just like, all right, we've had our fun. Let's just invent, embellish, embiggen the injury duration for a bunch of different players. And I guess the number one question for this season is, do you think that's on the cards again?
Yeah, I did a podcast today about Lauri Markkanen re-signing and how that impacts the team, because I think the Jazz foundation is a little bit too good to be the worst team in the NBA. They might be 14th best in the West, but there's like 6 teams in the East that factor into the same equation. The reason that's important is they're going to have to find ways to lose basketball games if you want to be in the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. So that means inconsistent minute logs for Lauri Markkanen, maybe misses elongated periods of times, and that shuffles the value for different players. Obviously, Markkanen's the highest pick in fantasy for the Jazz, but you look at guys like Collin Sexton, Keyonte George, maybe their workload is enormous in some weeks, and other weeks they're back to being a supplementary option. And so I think there is some value with the Utah Jazz. That said, it's going to be inconsistent on who's going to get the ball when. I think it's good long-term that the Jazz have Markkanen, but I don't think this year you're going to be seeing the most predictable statistics put up on a game-by-game basis because of all the things that factor into the Jazz's long-term prospects as an organization, not just this season of who's going to be good. There's a lot of tests and trials that'll be conducted internally.
Let's take a look at the guys who have actually arrived this season. Most of it is just draft stuff. Cody Williams, Isaiah Collier in the first round, Kyle Filipowski at the beginning of round 2. For some reason that doesn't seem clear to me at the moment, they signed Drew Eubanks as well, and that's basically what they did. That's one free agent signing. Yes, we can talk about maybe camp invites and Tavion Kinsey on a two-way, but that doesn't really mean that much. They are the guys that arrived for this season. So I guess the question here, or they ask all the hosts, is who the biggest addition is, and I don't really think there's any debate about it, but that'll lead us to talk now about Cody Williams, because he was picked at pick number 10 in this draft. He had a really slow beginning to Summer League in Utah. He had some better games in Vegas. Overall, those numbers are a little disappointing, I would say, for a top 10 pick when you take the totality of Summer League into it. Yeah, under 30% shooting from three. Low usage is probably the thing that concerned me. And that was the thing that concerned me in the draft with Williams Leif. Now, I don't really remember where you were on Cody pre-draft. Like, how high were you? Has your opinion changed after seeing him through the Summer League outings?
I actually was quite high on Cody Williams for just about the entirety of the pre-draft process, not only April through June, but from college basketball start till finish. I saw a lot of versatility from him, the ability to do things that few could do with the ball in his hands at the size he possesses. And he had injuries, where I think the biggest detriment about Cody Williams' game, if you're going into the scouting world, and I'll make this brief, is he lacked strength and he was injury prone. So if you kind of become stronger, a lot of his strengths become further improved as strengths, and his weaknesses get covered up pretty quickly. And then as for your question about the Summer League, I actually did an exercise with Rafael Barlow and James Barlow ranking some players out of the Summer League and picking them. I had Cody Williams 5th entering the Summer League and 5th coming out of the Summer League doing a redraft. And James was notably low on Cody, had him about 16 pre-draft, and ended up with him 5 after the Summer League. So I actually disagree. I think, yes, there was a lack of volume you may look for a top 10 pick, but the fact that he was able to put up about 16 points per game, shoot the ball well, play without having the ball just handed over to him, bodes well in a basketball sense. Now the question is, how much volume does he get in the NBA floor, which is what you're trying to prognosticate. That's a little bit different, but in terms of basketball, I like what he brings to the table. I just don't know how much of the ball he'll see initially, because there's a lot of guys the Jazz will have tests of how well they do with the ball, how adept are they attacking closeouts. And I think he's one of those guys who fits into a basketball roster well, but I'm not sure he'll put up the most productive stats immediately.
I think that's probably accurate. Like, we talk about these sort of players who have that size and the positionality, which is one of the reasons. Like, I wasn't particularly high on Williams either, because there were certain things I wasn't confident on the shot. I was a little bit, where's the defense? Does he generate events there? What's his big positive skill? I wasn't really certain on it. And when I watched the Utah games, the Salt Lake City Summer League games, I was like, okay, he's doing this stuff. He's sort of missing. He's not doing it. But then he did ramp it up, and that's an important thing, being able to sort of fit where you need to fit. Can you step up when you need to? Can you pull back and do the little things? And I think that is a valuable player. You're right in terms of where do the numbers come from, because his statistical profile from Summer League looks, not great. Like, it's not, there's no big numbers. There's no like, well, he showed this or he showed that. But it was just that fitting in sort of a process for Cody. And like we talked about in the initial part of this show about this team being still in that mix for a top draft pick, I think there are going to be plenty of opportunities for him to start games this season. Whether that's a regular thing or not, but we know that so many rookies, they struggle with efficiency, they struggle with finding their spot, they struggle with a bunch of different things, especially guys who are, as young as Cody Williams is. So I am interested to see. I think there's obviously a clear need for him on this Jazz team, who has gone for 2 years without a single actual small forward on the roster, and now he that space is just wide open for him to take at some point in the next couple of years. But it is going to be intriguing to see, how, because they slow played it last season with Taylor Hendricks and with Bryce Sensabaugh. Like, those guys, Sensabaugh didn't play really until the end of March, and Hendricks didn't really do anything until after the All-Star break. So I don't think it's going to be that way for Williams this season, but I wouldn't be surprised, Leif, if it just takes that little bit of extra time to get a bigger established role.
Yeah, I actually did a podcast about expectations of different players, and Williams, to me, is a guy that factors into the equation immediately. Ochai Agbaji, if you go a couple years ago, he was 22 coming out of Kansas, and he didn't play until March for the most part. Then you see Hendricks and Sensabaugh, like you said, the timelines were accurate there. I think of the Jazz rookies, Cody Williams will be thrown in the deep end, and it'll be ramped up but always on an NBA floor, as opposed to trying to build confidence by putting him as the man on a G League team. I think he's going to be a supplementary piece who may not put up huge notable stats until later in the year where his name called more frequently. But I think what he does well at the summer league level of, hey, I'm going to blend in, attack the closeout, score a quiet 21 points. Like, even though he had a poster dunk, I felt like his first game in Vegas, he had a quiet 21 points. He averaged 15 a game, not doing anything isolation heavy. He did it attacking closeouts, knocking down open shots, defending well. I don't think his numbers will be eye-popping, so maybe if you're listening to this for advice of who to pick, maybe not him. Maybe you look for a spike later in the season, but I think he'll be quietly among the more consistent rookies in this class, because I think other rookies are going to either have enormous volume early in the season, and whether they perform well or not, that'll depend, or they'll have very little volume, and then at the end of the year, a lot of volume. I think he'll have more of a steady trajectory than most rookies have had for the Jazz recently, and just most rookies in the NBA of the last few years.
We're going to talk about some other either rookies or guys that were rookies last season coming up soon, but today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Your schedule is packed with so many things. It's kids' activities, it's work social functions, it's other social functions, it's schools, whatever it is. So it is easy to let your priorities slip. But if you let all of your priorities slip, well, taking care of yourself becomes hard. And that's why self-care should become a priority. And one of those things that you can do for self-care, we have all different things that we do, but therapy can be one of those things. We need to find ways to make us happy and make us content in our life, and therapy can help you recognize those things and make that time and carve out that time that does become really important as we progress through the many stages of life. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's convenient. You fill out a form. They have a look at all the stuff on the form, and they match you with one of their therapists, which is key. Now, they're not going to get it right 100% of the time, because no one does. But that's okay, because if you don't click with your therapist, well, you can just change to another therapist free of charge. Because if you don't have that connection, that rapport, well, the whole process becomes pretty useless. So you find the person that you click with, and then that can become part of your self-care routine. So never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. So we talked, Leif, that this team didn't bring in a huge amount of players through free agency, because they didn't. That would be accurate. And in terms of the guys that they lost, it's also a pretty, who cares sort of a list. So Chris Dunn played an important role for the last couple of seasons, just that defensive presence in the backcourt, but he's no longer there. And then the other guys that are gone, I put Taylor Horton Tucker on this list with a question mark, but now they've actually they've renounced his free agency, right? So they don't even have cap hold. Look, he was terrible. This time last year, he was moving in as the starting point guard of this team, and that's a great way to find yourself towards the bottom of the standings. He doesn't have a home at the moment. Luka Šamanić was starting games for this team. We had Darius Baisley and Kenneth Lofton Jr., who were signed at the end of the season. Everyone loves Kenneth Lofton Jr., but they're done. So there's not a huge amount that really changed on this team in terms of guys going out. What I do want to talk about now, though, because this is where things get a little bit interesting, and I think there's some teams it's really straightforward to look at their starting group, and with this squad, I don't think it's that straightforward. So I asked you what your projected starting group is, and it's actually different to how I think it's going to go, but I want to hear your thoughts here, because you've got Keyonte George, Collin Sexton, Lauri Markkanen, and lock all those in. That's almost zero doubt to me that that's going to be the case. Then it's Taylor Hendricks and Walker Kessler in the front court. I want to focus this part here on those two players. Taylor Hendricks got that starting job towards the end of last season. I thought he showed part of the reason why I really liked him as a player. He defended the rim well. He was comfortable taking shots. They didn't always go in, but he spaced out. His summer league was a little bit disappointing, but I do agree with you that he is going to get that opportunity to start coming out of the gate. The Walker Kessler one is where we get interesting, because he didn't get that opportunity. He started 1 or 2 games last year, this weird elbow injury, moved to the bench, but down the stretch, he was not the starter. It was John Collins who was playing next to Taylor Hendricks. So what makes you think that they're going to reverse course on this now and go back to a Hendricks-Kessler pairing alongside Markkanen?
Well, I'll start with Hendricks. The reason I think he's going to start is because you need to grow the players for the future. And I would argue he was more theoretical than factual, or theoretical than applied, in terms of what he does well. When the Jazz, when he first came on to the Jazz, you'd think, oh, we got this lengthy defender. We hope he can be Jaden McDaniels. That's the guy he emulates. He was open talking to us about how much film he watches of McDaniels. Well, McDaniels was a ball in hand guy growing up, and he developed into this unbelievable defensive player. Well, Hendricks, when he started playing for the Jazz couldn't play man-to-man defense because he just didn't understand the concepts. He was playing zone. So I think he's a guy that they really want to develop so they can see what he is in totality down the road, so they can say maybe we get Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey. So he's a experimental one. He's going to start. As for Walker Kessler, which is probably where more surprise is for your fans, I think the Jazz and Walker Kessler, and I've heard various things, had conversations. I know they've had conversations, and I think they're positive coming out. Walker Kessler's frustrated with his role. The Jazz were frustrated at Kessler's seeming lack of growth, and maybe you could even say sophomore slump last year. And it was about lack of perception of clarity of who's going to do what. And I thought my role was going to be this, and they seem to have talked things out, and the vibes seem to be positive. And also, I don't think the Jazz care about John Collins' level of contentedness. They don't care if he's happy this year. They don't care. What does matter is seeing how good Walker Kessler actually is, because in his first year, he was a guy who was third in rookie of the year voting behind Paolo Banchero and Jalen Williams. And what he was is not as good a player as those guys, but he was an impactful player on the defensive side and someone who flashed potential as a lob threat. That's valuable in the NBA. We saw what Lively did for the Mavericks this year, energized them, rejuvenated their team. He's not as good as Derek Lively. I'll be open about that. But what he can do is impact the basketball game far more than John Collins can down the road in their career. So I don't think the Jazz care at all about the level of content for John Collins, and it'll be Walker Kessler starting.
Okay, so I agree with the vast majority of that. It's interesting to hear about the conversations that Kessler and the Jazz have had. He was disappointing. Even though he did increase his block rate last season, went from 8.2% to 9.2%, his rim finishing numbers were down, his true shooting was down, his impact stats were down. There was a lot that just wasn't as good as the year before. And yeah, there was obviously concerns with how does he defend and switch onto the perimeter, what does he do offensively if he's not rim running. But you say we can talk about the Jazz not caring about John Collins and his contentedness, but they lent super heavy into John Collins towards the end of last season, because there was a portion in the middle of the year where Collins was not doing much, and there was talks that the Jazz were looking to dump him at the trade deadline, and then they sort of reversed course and they just went, no, we're leaning super hard into John Collins here as our center. So what's the change versus I know they shouldn't care really about what John Collins is. He's not a part of their future. But what's the mindset change where it's like we really want to focus on Kessler here, and John Collins, even if he might give us a better chance to win, we're out on that. We don't care anymore. Why has that flipped versus where it was last season?
Because I think there was a lack of clarity from start to finish last year of what the Jazz were trying to accomplish. The Jazz were well under 500. I think they were 7-19 at one point.
Shout out to Taylor Horton-Tucker.
That was playing with Taylor Horton-Tucker. Then they take him out of the lineup. They end up 500 through 52 games. That's 26-26. And then for the final 30 games of the season, the Jazz were the worst team in the NBA. And that featured a lot of THT, and that featured a lot of John Collins. And it figured out, look, we're not very good. We weren't very good anyway. We overachieved. So let's this year have clear expectations. And it seems like the Jazz know that, yes, they just sound Lauri Markkanen, and that makes it hard to be as bad as you could be without him. But even with him on the roster, at best, the Jazz are 13th best team in the West, probably 14th. I think it's more likely the Jazz finish 15th in the West than it is 13th, honestly. And so the reason that no one cares about the John Collins part, or they should not, and I don't think they do, is because they know how outmatched they are in comparison to the rest of the West. The youth of the West is very, very good at the top, OKC, Minnesota, and then there's, of course, the Spurs with Wembanyama. The Jazz are trying to gear up to face those guys for the next decade, and so they're seeing what they have in Walker Kessler. I'd be pretty stunned if this isn't the case for most of the season. So maybe I'm optimistic, and maybe I'm just a critically thinking Jazz fan on this, but that's what I anticipate truly.
I think that most people would look at that and go, yeah, it makes complete sense. But I also think that most people would have looked at that last season and said, yeah, this is what it should be, and it just didn't happen. So I think maybe there's a disconnect. So we talk about you don't want to harp too much about this, but Will Hardy was too good for them to be bad. But he also said, I'm here, like I'm good, and I'm going to win games. And for me at the moment, John Collins is what wins me games. So do you think there's been more of a like, hey, Will, let's more get on board with what we're doing here versus, utilizing 29-year-old John Collins in a role over our high-level or rookie first-team center?
I succinctly put, I do think there's been some more impact from the front office, and the direction is more clear this year. I think the Jazz fans know, and I think, frankly, there's 10 teams in the NBA that are going to be bad, and that's the teams that don't make the play-ins, but there's going to be 8 of which that are truly awful basketball teams in comparison to the rest of the league. The Jazz know they factor into that, whether they try to or not. And so I think there's going to be a concerted emphasis on developing internally, as well as trying to find ways to lose games that are winnable. Whereas last year they tried to win those winnable games. And that's where you're going to see the emphasis on the youth movement. I think Sensabaugh is going to play more. I think you're going to see Isaiah Collier, a rookie, run the second unit for half of the season. I think you're going to see Keyonte George have every opportunity to try to prove he's the point guard of the future, which is a lot of talk in town in Utah. And then I don't think you're going to see a ton of Lauri Markkanen, and whether it's minutes restrictions or he misses games for his shoulder that's already hurt or different things. So the reason I bring up Kessler as a big proving point is he's got to prove he factors into the future at when the Jazz are supposed to be good, when they want to be good. The Jazz need reassurance that he can be that guy. And so that's why he'll have every chance to earn that spot.
You talked about Isaiah Collier, so let's move on to the group that you think will be their bench guys, and I have zero argument with this. Isaiah Collier, Jordan Clarkson, Cody Williams, John Collins, and Drew Eubanks in that mix. I wouldn't be surprised. To me, there's zero need for Eubanks to play. You've got Hendricks, you've got Markkanen, you've got Collins, you've got Kessler. That can realistically field most of those minutes. But yeah, they signed him for whatever reason, so he will get those minutes. The Collier one is probably one of the more interesting ones, and also Collier's got his problems. We'll see. He's a rookie point guard. He's not going to be a huge impact guy. What happened to Jordan Clarkson's shooting last season? Because he'd been he'd never an awesome shooter, but 34, 35, 36%. He shoot 27% from 3, 28% from 3 last season. Was there any particular reason for that? He is a lot older than a lot of people think, but he was, in terms of efficiency and shooting from deep, he was awful last season.
Well, I don't know the answer in terms of, I don't feel like there was mechanical differences, but I think he was frustrated that there was a lack of direction, and he's always been a tough shot taker and often a tough shot maker. Last year, it was just a tough shot taker for the most part, and I think his role shifted. He went from a starter to a bench player, and he played with Keyonte George, some with THT, some with Sexton, and none of those guys are perfectly conducive to play with one another, but particularly during his worst stretches, I think the lineups were the least conducive for him. So I don't know what to tell you in terms of, do I expect a bounce back year shooting the ball? I think there's going to be less of a emphasis on Clarkson trying to score the ball as a way to win, because I think the Jazz relied on that at times. So maybe he plays more freely. But the reason that would be interesting is if that were to happen, I think that improves his trade stock. And the Jazz, I don't think, want Clarkson or Collins on the roster, but there weren't takers, and so maybe that would create takers in the trade market, and they'd say, you know what, we'll take a gamble on Clarkson scoring, and he joins a playoff team. So that would be interesting from the fantasy perspective. Yeah,
he's one of those guys that can score a lot. Obviously, been struggles in many other different areas in terms of defensive stats and generating other things. But when the shooting falls off the way that it did, it makes it really tough to rely upon him. We've got some other stuff to talk about with the Jazz in a second, but today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. We are still in the summer. We are getting towards the end of it, and that means that sports are starting to come back. But we're still at a bit of a dearth. They're running towards the end of the Olympics. We're going to have Major League Baseball heading towards the playoffs, but all the other leagues are still waiting to begin. And FanDuel knows that, and they know that they want to give you some incentive to get in there and check out what is actually going on. So that's why all summer long, every customer on FanDuel gets one of these two things: a boost or a bonus every day of the summer. All customers, a boost, a bonus every day of the summer. So get in there, check out all the sports that are going at the moment, including Major League Baseball as we head towards the playoff run there. Go to FanDuel.com, check out all that stuff, and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. So, all right, we've talked I don't know why that little graphic came up. Apologies, that shouldn't have come up. For people watching that, let's talk about the player to watch, Leif. This is a guy that there was so much buzz about Keyonte George in training camp last season, right? We had every sort of report was, wow, he looks amazing. He is the best point guard here in camp. And then they opened the year with Taylor Horton-Tucker as the starter. Now, anyone with eyes watching that knew that this was not going to last and that Keyonte was going to get that opportunity. And he struggled, as all rookie guards do, especially a rookie point guard who wasn't a point guard coming out of college. And like you said, there's discussion about, I don't even know if he is a point guard. I don't know what his role is going to be full-time in the NBA. He had, as he was starting to get better, he had an injury. He had some bad moments towards the end of the season, but started to look better again. I am with you that in terms of the player to watch, I think he's going to be able to put together a lot better of a year. It's what happens with second-year guards. The efficiency should rise. For a guy that's considered like this volume scorer, he had a really low usage, like under 22%. Like you would have thought he was running at 24, 25, 26, given some of the inefficiencies. His minutes should rise. His shooting percentages should rise. His assist rate should rise. I'm expecting that he's relatively sort of unchallenged for 30-plus minutes on this team. Is that the feeling you get with him heading into his second season, second as a full-time point guard?
Well, I think he has every opportunity to be the full-time point guard, and that means he's going to have the reins to score the ball. I watched him at Summer League, and this is kind of a minute detail, but you saw every indication of this guy wants the ball in his hands and wants to score. Like some guys say, I want one game, I'm going to try to score. And even when he shot badly, he still scored 30 points. So what he has is this kind of unbridled confidence, a belief in himself that he'll be able to score. And then you see, for a guy who's not a natural point guard who didn't play it growing up, you see a flash of some tremendous passes. Yes, there are turnover issues, but you look at even the best assist to turnover guys, none of them really score like he does. And then the guys who score like he does coming into the NBA, even if they've played point guard, often have turnover issues. So the fact that the 16th pick of the draft has the opportunity to be a franchise point guard, and that's a discussion after year one, I think is a positive. I think that you're going to have inconsistency from Keyonte George if you're looking from the fantasy perspective. I think some weeks you're going to have a guy who shoots the cover off the basketball and has a lot of 20-point, 6 assist type of games. And then another week you're going to have some significantly worse numbers, especially due to efficiency. But on a bad team, you're going to have some people score. People develop. On every bad team, there are players that develop. And I think that he's going to have the chance with the ball in his hands to develop as much as anyone. Last year was Collin Sexton, who I think showed that there's an efficiency to the way he scored the basketball, even on a poor team. Does it translate to winning? That's the bigger question. But there's an efficiency to the way he scored that was developed through a lot of repetitions and the ability to have those repetitions on a poor team. This year, the aspirations are even less so. There's going to be more opportunities for him. There's no Jordan Clarkson's going to take some of your shots away. I think that's less of a factor this year. So Keyonte George, if I'm going to lay out a rough expectation, I'm expecting 16, 17 points a game and 5 assists. And that's not amazing efficiency, but there's a lot of numbers to it. Like there's actually volume this year. And so I'd be cautiously optimistic if I were a fantasy owner looking at Keyonte George.
What is really interesting there is I was literally just about to tell you what my projected numbers were for him this season and see what you thought. And my projected stats were 17 points and 6.2 assists. So yeah, I think that's basically what you were a little bit lower on the assist number, but I got him at 17 and 6 with 2.5 threes, but still shooting like 42% from the field. I think that's a very reasonable expectation. But I also think that what if he could score 19 a game? He could get 19 and 7 on this team the way it's constructed. I think it's outrageous to suggest that he could do that. It's going to take work, but it's about confidence. It's about confidence in yourself and confidence in the role, and then taking those steps forward and comfortability. And I think all those things for Keyonte do tick that box. Now, you did mention Collin Sexton, who, much like John Collins, at the start of the year, he was just like, what is this guy doing? He's coming off the bench. He's not really producing anything. Like, he's not this guy. And then he moved into the starting lineup, and honestly, he was awesome. And I'm not a big Collin Sexton guy. In the past, I thought this guy is a scorer who can do it sort of efficiently, but never sets up anyone else, doesn't defend at any sort of level. He's just like his real empty scorer. But he was different last season. Now you put him as this make or break player. Why is that? You just don't think that the Jazz view him as a core piece to be between Markkanen and George? Like what did he score last season? 19 points a game with 5 assists. He did it efficiently again. He had pretty high usage. Like, is his role long term to be the new Jordan Clarkson? Is that what you think he can be?
Well, see, it's really interesting. He scored 21 a game on far better efficiency as a starter, and then only 13 a game with far worse efficiency as a bench player. Yeah. So what that means is he's going to be a starter. And now the question for me as a Jazz fan, as opposed to a stats watcher and fantasy basketball owner in this case, would be, does that equate to having a winning ability or an ability to win with him playing a starting 2 guard, because he's not a point guard?
No, it's not.
But in terms of fantasy, this year, you're going to get the ball in his hands a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if he scores 23 a game and about 5 or 6 assists. I think that's very possible, because he did take a tangible leap. Like, you would watch him and you're like, wow, he's way more in control. All that burst that he's had, he knew how to use it. I don't know how much it equates to winning, but the Jazz don't have any aspirations of winning. So I would say he's the guy that I think has the most likelihood for like a sneaky under the radar mid 20, 22, 23 points per game, 5 assists, three boards, numerous threes per game. I think that's very possible. Like a la Kevin Martin of years ago, where you're like, well, the guy, if you're to rank out players, wouldn't rank that highly, but in terms of pure production, it's pretty good. He's that type of player for this team, in my opinion.
The final 23 games of last season, Collin Sexton averaged 21 points with 6 assists and hit 2 threes at 49% from the field overall. And honestly, like, why can't he do 21 and 6 again? Like, there's no real reason that because he'll be in, like, he won't play 26 minutes a night again, which is what he played over the course of last season. I'm sure he's going to play more than that. And historically, he has been really efficient. And one of my criticisms of him was, like, it's just complete tunnel vision. He never passes to anybody, but that changed. And then I was looking at some of the impact stats and looking at EPM, and his stats were, like, stunning to me. Like, he was a career best by an extraordinary margin. His best career season in EPM in the past had been the 21-22 season, where he played 35 minutes a game, and it was a plus 0.1. He was plus 2.2 this season in the 96th percentile for offensive EPM. Like, yes, there's all teammate context dependent things there, but he was great. And that is I think a bit of a win for the Jazz to discover that, whether it's to be traded later on or be just a part of this team, because again, he sucked at the start of the year. Like, his role was unclear. He wasn't really doing anything. And then he stepped into this larger role and was really able to take off, which is, so always a W when you can get a player to do that, sort of, that's not expected. The major storyline for this team, Leif, I think we've covered this already. In fact, I know we've covered this already. They're going to be, like, tanking again. We're going to have these, big changes to rotations, especially through March and April. We're going to have 1 week injuries become 3.5 week injuries. We're going to have Lauri Markkanen maybe hit 65 games on the dot, Jaren Jackson Jr. style, just to see if he qualifies for an award. I don't think no one's debating this, are they? This is what's going to happen again, I'm almost certain.
Yeah, I did an episode. It's like you're reading my notes from my episode I did for Locked On Jazz today. I said if the Jazz play Lauri Markkanen 65 games, then there's going to be games where they do the Wembanyama minutes restriction style, where they play him for a segment and they make headway in the game, and all of a sudden he sits and then they're down 10 again. Or they lose by such amount that ensures they lose the game, and it may hinder his counting stats, or they'll go all out on his counting stats and they'll just play enough of the young guys that they end up losing the basketball games anyway, and he has a chance for all NBA because there's no incentives laden in his contract he just signed. So Lauri Markkanen has the chance to really put forth good numbers, but he's going to have either limited minutes or limited games. So that would concern me in terms of the longevity of those and the legitimacy of those statistics for an entire season from the fantasy perspective. but I think he's going to be efficient. I think he's going to put up a big number. I think there's going to be more of an emphasis of individual scoring, so maybe slightly worse field goal percentage, more points per game, if I were anticipating anything for Lauri. But yeah, it's like we're of the same mind where you're going to see him hit 65 on the dot, no more games than that, or you're going to see fewer games than that because he doesn't have tremendous incentives laden in his contract.
The burning question I have for this team, and this is, I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy or try and read into people's psyches or mindsets a huge amount, but there was something with this one that I thought was important. It is regarding Lauri Markkanen. We all heard from Lauri Markkanen coming out, I trust this Jazz organization. Every report is he wants to be in Utah. He's going to stay in Utah. He loves it here. The fact to me that the extension was available, there was that one day where he could sign it and be trade eligible, but he didn't sign it on that day. Like, he waited until that wasn't a possibility. Is there any sort of tension regarding that? Because obviously, to me, again, from an outside perspective, that seems really obvious that he's like, I'm not signing on this day because I know you sneaky bastards might just trade me away. So he can come out and be like, I love it here. I've got faith in all these guys. But there's got to be something underlying that all this stuff waited for this specific, until that day had passed. Yes, it was only a one-day window, but there was that one-day window that he waited for that so he could at least guarantee that he would be there for this season versus like, hey, we've got all this money and you are our future for the next 3 to 4 years. Is that like completely off base? Am I trying to read something into that? Because to me, that doesn't scream we have complete trust in each other and the way that we are viewing you moving forward.
Well, I think it actually would indicate that he likes Utah enough to not want the possibility of being traded.
Look, I think I 100% agree that Lauri Markkanen wants to be in Utah and loves being in Utah, and that is why he waited for that day, so he can at least guarantee he's here for the year. But what it seems to me is that the fact that he felt he had to wait for that day means that he was like, yeah, but what if they're going to trade me? Yeah, like they could be moving me on. So that is there that level of confidence that he has in that organization that is being put out by everyone? Is that misplaced or just like completely off base? Because it just seems to be like you could, if you had no worries with this, then you could have just signed it on that first day and you could have been traded, but he deliberately waited so that wouldn't be the case. So he would stay where he wanted to when maybe that's what the organization didn't want to happen.
I don't know. I don't know for certain. My inclination, and based on what I heard all about throughout this process, is he was going to sign it after that day and just ensure that he's on the Jazz because he likes Utah. Yep. Does it have to do with maybe the Jazz would consider trading him because it's one day possibility? Maybe in the back of his mind, but I didn't hear anything of the sort. Okay. The one thing I think is interesting is how much the Jazz asked for Lauri and how much money they were able to pour into him. And that was about as high of a contract as he could have gotten. Like it was a matter of it was just about the very top that he feasibly could have gotten from anyone, but the Utah Jazz especially. And I think it shows an on-board nature. Like he knows, like this is the long-term process. I've got all the money in the world. They have the faith in me. I have the faith in them. So maybe that's just the optimist in me. And I tend to be optimistic, but I've had to be realistic in doing these shows. I've been pretty critical of different players throughout my time talking about the Jazz, both on the air and to anyone who had listened to me at the games. But I do think there's a good faith between both Lauri Markkanen and the Jazz front office.
Talking about Lauri, like the last 2 seasons, obviously there's been situations where he hasn't played through March before those very obvious reasons. One thing that I'm not sure that it's necessarily underreported, but one of the big reasons that Lauri was able to step his game up as much as he did in Utah is the efficiency went way up. Yeah, his 2-point numbers went from 55 up to 59. It was at 56 last season. His overall field goals were high, but over the final 20 games of last season, it did start to fall back again. And he shot only 51% from 2 over those final 25 games of last season. Not to say that he's regressing and going to be that guy, but like he's then got to push that back up to where he was. What's the next step for Lauri Markkanen? What's the next thing that he can do? Or is he sort of like, he's 27 now, this is what we get. I'm not sure there's another level. Like where are you at with that in terms of, can he go further, or is it this level and then we sort of wait to see where the efficiency level's off at?
Well, where he can go further in a basketball level, I'm not sure how much it bears out statistically, but in terms of when the Jazz are ready to compete, what you want from him is you want him to develop more of an individual scoring game as opposed to being the recipient of passing off of action. You want him to be able to not only punish closeouts like he does, but face up and score from the mid post because he's 7 feet with a silky smooth jump shot. His efficiency is unbelievable. Like I did this on my show today. You don't see 7-footers, much less freak athlete 7-footers like Lauri Markkanen is. You don't think of him as a freak athlete, but he is an unbelievable athlete. He basically was teetering on the edge of 50, 40, 90 for 2 straight years, scoring 24 points per game. It's unbelievable. Like that's I know he never quite achieved 50, 40, 90, but if you averaged out his 50, 40, 90 splits, it's like 49, 40, and 89. It's unbelievable. And so statistically, he might just be that. He might be that for the next couple of years. And it may be one drops off a little bit. Is it maybe his field goal percentage drops off because he tries to create from the mid-range a little more frequently this year? But then maybe it adds a point to his scoring. He's essentially the same player. It'll just be with what efficiency does he achieve that? And then when they finally find the guy that they want to pair Lauri Markkanen with, how does he play with another guy? Because I think that's his best attribute. He's unbelievably complementary to so many different types of players.
And that's basically why so many teams were like, hey, we should be looking to get Lauri Markkanen, like fitting him on the Thunder, fitting him on the Warriors, fitting him like any team. It's one of those guys that will just, if we put Lauri Markkanen here, like we'd be better. Like, yeah, he would fit on so many different teams. And that's a huge thing for so many different players. We're going to talk now about a bold prediction that you have for us, Leif. And some of these guests that I have on, the predictions aren't necessarily that bold, and I'm not sure how bold this one is. You talk about Cody Williams making an all-rookie team. Do you mean the first team or the second team? Like, where are you at? How bold do you want to get here? I want the real, like, strong, the big ball stuff. Like, what are we talking here?
Well, I mean, I would love to see him make first team. I just don't know, like, if he has the opportunity to put up the numerical numbers that would warrant a first team. I think he could have that impact. Like I said, after watching the Summer League, the redraft based on the future, not only the Summer League performances, I thought Cody Williams was a top 5 rookie. Like I think he still very well can be, but I don't think he's going to put up eye-popping, gaudy numbers. And sometimes it works, like Brandon Pajemski, who's now untouchable according to the Warriors. His numbers weren't eye-popping. They were very solid. I think Cody Williams, if he were to make the first team, would have to be a 10 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. I don't know if he gets that. So I would say second team. And I know it's not the craziest thing. The other bold thought I thought of was Keyonte George scoring about 20 a game. And like I said, I gave you my actual estimation of 17. So that's fairly bold. But I thought giving a team-oriented one in terms of first team, second team, all rookie was bolder than just giving one player scoring 20. But those were the two I pondered.
Let's talk about the team record because, again, they're going to be pretty bad. They're going to deliberately try and be bad. And, Leif, you think they're going to deliberately be, like, very, very bad. 21 and 61 as a record prediction. Now, in usual years, you think that's probably going to be the record for the second worst team. But, like, what do we have? 3 teams under 20 wins last season. But we know there's flattened lottery odds. It's nothing really to argue here. But it's also a possibility, Leif, that they win 30 games because some of these players and the coaching is just too good. And there are other teams that are just so embarrassingly bad that they push through that. But I think that's, in just terms of the direction of where the team goes, I think that's a reasonable prediction. Last thing before we get out of here, I've got a question for you. We are heading into the 24-25 NBA season. So I've got a quiz for you. It's a pretty straightforward quiz, and I think this one is one of the easier ones. So all I want to know is, as the 24-25 season comes, who's the first name that comes to your mind for the Jazz who wore number 24 or number 25?
I'll go with Paul Millsap.
Paul Millsap was
number 24.
Paul Millsap was number 24. They've had some interesting number 24s in their history. Do you know who currently number 24 is?
On the Jazz right now, number 24. I should know this.
You should. Well, not really, because I think numbers are.
Is it going to be Filipowski?
No, it's not. It's it is a white center. That doesn't narrow it down that much because there are a few of those guys on this team.
Yeah. Oh, that's Kessler. I did know that.
It is Walker Kessler, but
that is obvious. I was thinking to myself, too far in the back of the memory, but the first one that came to my mind was easily Paul Millsap. That was the little kid Leif enjoyed watching Paul Millsap.
Yeah, now I'm thinking, so I saw this and I went, okay, I've got Lauri Markkanen burnt into my head as wearing 24, because that must have been what he wore for the Bulls. What does he wear for the Jazz? I can't even think what number Lauri
23.
23. He was 24 in Chicago. Obviously, he couldn't wear 23 in Chicago. But yeah, Micah Potter, big number 25 legend for the Jazz last season as well. But yeah, getting that Paul Millsap one, good pull. Paul Millsap is the guy that I want Taylor Hendricks to try and emulate. Hope he gets there. Don't know if he will, but that's the sort of guy.
I don't see that. I don't see that comp, because Millsap was like an unbelievable rebounder from day one. He was like nose for the ball, undersized 4 type of guy when the 4 was supposed to be a back to the basket guy. And he only developed the shooting his last year in Utah and the Miracle in Miami, then went to Atlanta and became an all-star. I don't think that – I think if Hendricks pops, it's going to be of the ilk of he becomes a really good shooter, more like Robert Covington than even people said, like Jaren Jackson or Jonathan Isaac, all those people. I think it'll have to be more of he's really good on defense, becomes a solid shooter, as opposed to the side of, oh, he's a really good shooter and now he's this like dog defensively. I think he's more of a flashy defender who you hope becomes more of that dog defensively right now. So like of the Ariza or Covington mold is what I've decided.
Interesting. So his role is going to be interesting this season, but we're at the end of this show now, Leif. So first of all, tell us like what's going on. You're hosting Locked On Jazz at the moment, like periodically. What's happening over there, and what have you got, guys? So what are you guys cranking out over on Locked On Jazz at the moment?
So Locked On Jazz, I'm doing a lot of August. David Locke's on vacation, so I've been filling in on vacation the last 2 years, and so I enjoy it. And right now, a lot of it's about Lauri Markkanen. Obviously, there's a lot of trade rumors; those have been dispelled. He's back with the Jazz. I talked about Lauri's statistical expectations, what to expect for the Jazz, some of the draft prospects you should become familiar with if you're a Jazz fan or just an NBA fan, because it's an awesome draft coming up. And a couple other clever ideas, and I bring in a rotating cast of characters who cover the Jazz and help break down their expectations. So you're not just hearing my own thoughts as a Jazz fan. Some of them are more skeptical, or some of them are more optimistic, and I try to give a good mix of that. So I always enjoy talking to the audiences about the Jazz.
So go check out Locked On Jazz. Leif, of course, he's over at Locked On NBA Big Board as well, talking NBA draft. And thank you again, Leif, for coming on and giving us your thoughts and inside info on the Utah Jazz.
Absolutely. Appreciate the invite.
So that brings us to the end of the show. Don't forget, if you are here on YouTube, thumb it up and leave your comments. Listen to the audio version as well. We're going to have much more going on with these team previews, and Yahoo Fantasy should be opening in the next couple of days to see what the initial sort of numbers are over there. We'll probably do a mock draft. I'm not super interested is not the right word. I'm not certain of exactly when that's going to happen, but we'll do an initial breakdown of the numbers that come out. We know they're going to change absolutely massively over the coming weeks and months as well. All right, guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.